So I recently watched Andor for the first time, since people were talking about it when Season 2 was coming out. To be honest, I didn't even know what Andor was actually about, other than that it was a Star Wars show for grown-ups and had a contingent of people mad at it for having brick walls or something. Like, I live under enough of a rock that I didn't even know that Andor was a prequel to Rogue One because I never saw that movie. I didn't even know who Cassian Andor was and that it was a prequel to that movie until like 3 episodes in, when I was googling stuff on the show. But anyway, I loved Andor. Season 2 especially had moments that have been in my head for weeks, like the Gorman Massacre or the complex characters or the numerous excellent monologue scenes. It really was my favorite Star Wars in years. So I watched Rogue One for the first time after finishing Andor and I really liked the movie. Like way more than I ever thought I would back in 2016. Now, I don't know how much I'd have liked Rogue One without Andor, but I'd imagine I'd at least find it fine, because it was. That also inspired me to check out Solo for the first time. I skipped this movie from pure lack of interest, but I also thought it was pretty alright. Like, not a movie for the ages or whatever, but it had a lot of good moments. As my last Star Wars video showed, I was doing a bit of a rewatch so I could talk about the prequels via that Darth Vader video, but then I decided I was going to rewatch the sequel trilogy as well. I saw The Force Awakens like 6 times back when it was new and on Blu-ray, and then I saw The Last Jedi in theaters but never saw it again, and I saw Rise of Skywalker only once as well, and shockingly I thought the movie was awful. But I was very curious to see how I'd feel about the first 2 sequels again, since I haven't seen them since before Rise of Skywalker existed, so I was putting off rewatching The Rise of Skywalker for a while since I already thought it sucked and was the worst Star Wars movie, so why would I want to watch it again beyond completion's sake? But I was taking care of my cousins one night who are 10 and 12, and I decided to throw this movie on, and we all watched and basically said the same thing.
What a piece of junk!
A viewing where I had many thoughts I decided to share in this video. Not that this video is going to add anything to the discourse, I'm sure every frame of this movie has been dissected on YouTube already, but I just watched it and wanted to vent. But before I go any further, I figured I'd explain that I'm the kind of Star Wars fan that feels like Star Wars is just the original trilogy and then some other parts of it I like, but can take or leave most of the rest of it. Like, I grew up with the original trilogy DVD set from 2004. My first Star Wars game was LEGO Star Wars 2, the original trilogy. Like, I grew up in the prequel era, but didn't really engage with much prequel media, besides seeing the Clone Wars movie in theaters. I can also say I was a big fan of LEGO Star Wars The Complete Saga when that came out on Xbox 360, although without any dialogue, it's kind of hard to tell what's going on in the prequel levels. I was just playing because it had explosions and lightsabers and stuff. My first exposure to the prequels for real was YouTube videos I watched bashing them from like 13 years ago. Unsurprisingly, my preteen self watched these videos and decided I hated those movies without watching them. But then I did watch them, and hated them anyway. But now, as an adult rewatching them, I think the lore of these movies is fascinating. I think Revenge of the Sith is a legitimately good movie, albeit slightly overhyped these days. Nothing's gonna beat Empire Strikes Back. Sorry, that's just how I feel about that. But I appreciate the whole prequel era for how it expanded the Star Wars universe beyond what was previously known. It actively added new information to the franchise that made it bigger. Like, now there are things about the Star Wars world that we just know because it was on screen in the prequel era, like the Jedi Council, or Coruscant, or the Senate, or the Clone Wars, and all that stuff. Even if I think Clones is just a shitty movie, a fact that made people mighty upset in my previous video. Sorry, I still don't like it. I want to watch the Clone Wars show since people keep recommending it, but there's a lot of episodes of it, so I keep putting it off. I'm eager to try watching at least the first 2 seasons of Mando as well, and there were a lot of moments in Obi-Wan I liked, even if it's not the greatest show I've ever seen in my life. Point being that there are Star Wars things I like and dislike across the franchise's lengthy history. I was there when Force Awakens came out, and I really enjoyed it in the theater and on my rewatches of it. I remember how anti-prequel the internet was back in the mid-2010s, and Disney was really trying to make the anti-prequel with this movie. In the time since, I've wondered how this movie holds up. At the time, I thought it was good, but needed good sequels to be excused for its creativity issues, to put it lightly. I also thought Star Wars movies coming out every year would make it easier for people to get burned out on Star Wars, which also happened. But yeah, since Rise of Skywalker was so bad, I thought it retroactively was going to ruin movies I already liked. But you know what? 10 years later, having not seen the movie in a long time, I was pleasantly surprised by my rewatch of The Force Awakens. To me, a movie's quality is made up of several different things, and Episode 7 gets a lot right. The movie is absolutely gorgeous. The shift to practical effects and sets really adds a lot to the movie, I thought. Everything just looks real, and stuff that isn't also looks realistic. The lighting, the costumes, the props, the aliens, the locations, I just really like watching the movie. Personally, I thought the script was really funny, and the actors just have so much chemistry that it made the dynamics really entertaining. I found Finn and Rey both compelling characters in this movie. This was before Finn was ruined, so his arc is really well done, and was the most fresh and interesting concept in the entire movie. Rey, while being a Luke repeat in many ways, also seemed interesting to me since I found her journey compelling too. someone who wanted to stay stuck in isolation, clinging to the belief that her parents will come back, having had to learn everything she needs to survive on her own, and later accepting that nobody's coming for her and that she should just find comfort by exploring the universe and making new connections. I thought that was a good plot. The action was fun to watch, the score was as excellent as ever, Harrison Ford turns in a really good performance as the emotional anchor of the movie. I liked the movie, I really did. But then, of course, the problem with The Force Awakens is the same as it always was. The movie is just not that creative. It is essentially an Episode 4 remake with a lot of details changed to make it different enough to be a sequel. Good enough in 2015, yeah, but in hindsight, the creative bankruptcy of this movie essentially damaged Star Wars for a long time. This movie wanted nothing to do with the kinds of world building the prequels spent so much time on, when the approach those movies took has just aged a lot better. The thing is, the New Republic falling to what is essentially the neo-Nazis of Star Wars, that sounds like a pretty interesting story. Shame it's not the plot of the movie, you know? Like, seeing how the systems work and how complacency tore them down again actually sounds pretty good. But the movie does not focus on that to not be seen as too prequel-esque. Instead, just resetting the whole galaxy to Empire versus Rebellion out of nowhere with no explanation, which in hindsight was so obviously a bad move. When The Last Jedi came out, I also really liked it, but years later I have more notes. I just feel like fundamentally the plot of Luke losing his Jedi Order and being disillusioned and quitting is a super interesting story. One that I could buy enough, however, that's not the plot of the movie. Which is a shame because the plot of the movie is the Resistance fleeing the First Order in one spot of space with no fuel for 2 hours while various side quests take place alongside it. The movie, like Force Awakens, is stunning. I think the visuals and effects and shots are some of the best in Star Wars, and I find many of the performances quite compelling. Mark Hamill gives what I think is his best acting as Luke Skywalker with very little competition. He might not have liked the story itself as much, or might not have been what he would have thought was cool, but you gotta give him credit, he showed up on set to work. And I thought his character just had a lot of nuance to him that comes from the performance. His backstory just feels rushed and underdeveloped. And I feel like getting me to understand the scene would be easy. Luke sees through the Force that Han might die at the hands of his son, ignites his lightsaber as a response, and feels bad, but it's too late because Ben saw it the wrong way and never gave Luke the chance for amends and explanation. That sounds really good, I just wish we got more of the scenes surrounding that to make it more impactful, when as is, it just feels rushed and has left a lot of people actually thinking that Luke tried to kill Ben when that's just Ben's biased account. If the movie took more time on this, maybe it could have been easier to digest. But just sticking to the movie we got, I still enjoy Luke's element of it. His scene with Yoda is one of my favorite scenes in all of Star Wars because its philosophy on life and leadership and failure are really poignant. The message that failure is an important part of learning and living and that it's never too late to get back up and keep going. I mean, you could put Yoda's theme in the background of anything and it would probably feel really emotional, but this was a great scene. And while I edit that, I realized that The Rise of Skywalker actually does just use Yoda's theme in the scene where Luke raises the X-Wing out of the water as a callback to the Empire scene, which basically means that they actually did find a way to use Yoda's theme in a way that makes it completely unemotional, because Yoda's not in the scene and yet his theme is playing. Just because they wanted to ape off the nostalgia of the literal best scene in Star Wars, one of the most iconic of all time. So, credit to Rise of Skywalker, it did the impossible. Rey and Kylo were also parts of the movie I enjoyed. Rey finding out that she really is a nobody from nowhere was great. I thought it was inspiring that you can be a great hero while also being a nobody. And then Kylo making the active choice to be evil over and over again despite how good his upbringing was and where he comes from was an interesting dichotomy. But again, the movie undercuts itself with lame jokes, boring side quests, overly explaining the themes with expository dialogue, and then the side characters just not feeling as interesting as the main ones. And then Finn goes through an arc in this movie that feels really redundant since I thought that learning the meaning of fighting for the greater good was something implied in part 1, but I guess technically not. This is where he actually learns it. But still, I don't know, not exploring his chemistry with Rey felt like a misstep since they share like one scene together in this movie. So I did enjoy it altogether, but not as much as I did in theaters. It has too many skippable scenes and rushed elements to where I think it's a good enough movie with good ideas, but not my favorite. I like Force Awakens and especially Revenge of the Sith a lot more. But still, the movie is fine. But like I said, I never liked The Rise of Skywalker. The whole movie seemed sus the moment they revealed that Palpatine was back as the main antagonist. I just thought it screamed desperate and something the writer pulled out of their ass at the 11th hour to give this story some kind of ending without having to come up with anything original. But it was a few months away from release, and so I was like, hey, maybe it'll be good. The illusion was shattered the moment the movie came out, though. I skipped over it in theaters, however, but caught it on digital a year later and never touched it again until now. But the movie is a flop within a couple minutes. The movie drops the return of Palpatine in the opening crawl, like it's set dressing and not a plot point that undoes the entire last trilogy. But then the heroes need to explore the galaxy to find the path to Palpatine while being pursued by Kylo Ren, who leads the First Order. With that established, I'm now going to explain why this movie doesn't work in a couple of bullet points. First, I feel like the movie could be an alright action-adventure movie if it wasn't the end of this big saga. By that, I mean there's nothing really wrong with the movie on a technical level. It's littered with action set pieces that are fun to watch, like the heroes getting chased through the desert or Rey fighting Kylo Ren over the waves. All very cool and exciting moments if you turn your brain off and ignore the plot. But then there are just these things that frame the action that make no sense. Like how the whole fight with Rey and Kylo over the water takes place in the wreckage of the Death Star 2. Like, the Death Star 2 that got blown to smithereens. It just doesn't make any sense for it to be in this good condition, and then it also doesn't make any sense for there to be artifacts that lead you to this wreckage and line up perfectly to reveal secrets. That would be the kind of thing that would be fine if this was the only Star Wars movie and this was just some ambiguous battle that wasn't on screen, but it feels laughably nonsensical since the second Death Star blew up like 30 years ago. The whole setup makes no sense. I'm normally not super interested in nitpicks or things that would belong on the sin counter. I usually like to look at things on more of a macro scale, but sometimes a plot is so bad that the micro details just start piling up and up and up. So then that's the next thing. The main plot is supremely convoluted. The Rise of Skywalker sees the heroes hop from planet to planet to planet every few minutes. This might make it seem like an epic finale, but instead it makes the movie feel like it's going at breakneck speed and is barely making any sense. The plot is just doing whatever it takes to find Sith holocrons and wayfinders to get to Palpatine, but like I said, shit's just happening constantly in this movie with no room to breathe, and so it becomes hard to follow and recall after you watch it. Like, oh no, Chewbacca's been captured, but no, Rey then kills him, but oh no, he's alive and needs to be rescued. Oh, and this is a person Poe used to know and he's had history with, and they can help us do the thing with the thing that helps us translate the Sith language, but 3PO's memory will get wiped if he does it, so that's a big goodbye scene right after that, but no, actually R2 saved a backup of his memory, so it's fine. These are just some examples of how this movie paces its story and undercuts every moment. With each passing Star Wars movie, I'd say the amount of concurrent plot lines grew with each one, but this one is just all over the place. With plot twists out the wazoo, like actually Hux was the spy for the Resistance and he dies 5 minutes later for it. It's just all nonsense. But hey, I laughed my ass off when he said, "I'm the spy," because so many of the lines in this movie are so bad it's hilarious, like somehow Palpatine returned or they fly now.
Oh, they fly now! They fly now? They fly now!
Next big issue, Kylo and Rey were both ruined. I mean, for some, they didn't even have characters to ruin since they never liked them to begin with, but from where I'm sitting, I think we can all still agree this is a shitty-ass conclusion to their story. For Kylo Ren, I really liked the idea that he just decides to be a bad person and rule the First Order because he wants to. I thought that was a refreshing change of pace, making a main rival who isn't an idealist like Count Dooku or a tragic figure like Darth Vader, he's just an asshole. The Rise of Skywalker ending with the redemption of Ben Solo feels totally unearned and lame. It's just so predictable and done before. But then, him being the final villain would be a bit anticlimactic since he's been established as not that strong in the dark side yet, but maybe the movie could have made him super threatening and thus more satisfying to see defeated. If it were to go down like that, it probably would make you wonder what these movies accomplished or were trying to say at the end of the day. But in the final product we got, it's even worse because this redemption arc just feels really hollow and half-baked. I also thought this movie backtracking The Last Jedi's Rey arc was another diabolical mistake. Again, creating a main character in Star Wars who comes from nothing and decides to be great is a really inspiring arc, I thought. But then making her Palpatine's granddaughter reads like the lamest fanfiction shit you could possibly come up with. Plus, it makes me think about Palpatine reproducing, which none of us needed. And then it makes Rey extra important because your parents were nobody. By choice to protect you. It just sucks, I'm sorry. It once again makes this galaxy feel super small and connected together by a couple of important destined families. But don't worry, the other characters are superfluous in this movie too. The main trio of the sequels doesn't really work because Rey and Poe don't even meet until the end of the second movie, and then in this third movie, Finn and Poe back up Rey while she does the important stuff and bicker with each other along the way to contrive drama. But their role in the story feels ultimately undercooked, which is the greatest tragedy since Finn's story was the most interesting part of the first movie and they totally dropped the ball on his character by making him so sidelined in the final chapter. And then there's one of the biggest issues, which is Palpatine as the main villain. And before I get into that though, I would like to say that I think many Star Wars fans should just be more comfortable accepting that there are some things in Star Wars that are just stupid and don't make sense and are made up as they go along. Retcons and inconsistencies have been with this series for a long time. I'm willing to give Lucas the benefit of the doubt in the Darth Vader father twist though. I think episode 4 left just enough doors open for me to believe Vader was always Luke's father. Why else would Vader be the only Imperial to survive the Death Star explosion, you know? But then, I used to be the kind of person who was like, no, Luke and Leia were definitely related from the beginning. Yoda said there was another in Empire, and Leia heard Luke through the Force at the end. But, nah, that twist was absolutely made up in the third movie. One of the bedrocks of Star Wars' story was a complete asshole retcon. And it's not a bad thing, it's just true. But I'll still see people treating it as though retcons are like new to Star Wars. I still see people defending how the existence of Qui-Gon doesn't contradict Obi-Wan saying he was trained by Yoda in Empire, and like, I guess technically the words instructed me can mean many things, but the implication in Empire and Jedi is pretty clear. Obi-Wan was trained by Yoda directly. But the Phantom Menace introduces Qui-Gon, and Obi-Wan is a master immediately after the death of Qui-Gon and presumed death of Darth Maul. It's a retcon. It works for the story. I like Qui-Gon and what he adds to the mythos in Anakin's story, but it's a retcon, as is Anakin being the one who built C-3PO. That one was really stupid, but Lucas probably felt like R2 and 3PO were too iconic to not have in the movies. But my point is this. There are little things in Star Wars that don't make sense or add up, and that has always been the case. It's not a new thing. But Rise of Skywalker is a lot different. I wanted to establish that I'm not a blind fanboy for any of these movies despite loving the series, but it really is the Rise of Skywalker that does more damage. Not only does bringing back Palpatine feel like a desperate move for attention from Disney, but it also ruins so many things at once. Like, the final sacrifice of Darth Vader feels pretty pointless since Palpatine has a contingency plan for that. Guess Anakin's torture and sacrifice was for nothing. It's not like it doesn't make sense for Palpatine to have contingency plans, it does, but the issue is that him coming back is just too much. Like, I don't think the existence of the First Order undoes the original trilogy on its own. A wise man once said, as long as there are people, there will always be war. So, Empire True Believers rising up decades later is pretty believable. The problem was, like I said, Force Awakens and Last Jedi were just not curious enough to flesh out that backstory. But Palpatine orchestrating the whole thing essentially makes the original trilogy really pointless. Like, the prequels are all about Palps' rise to power through political manipulation and carefully trapping the Jedi Order into the Clone Wars to set them up to be wiped out and Anakin to become Darth Vader. The original trilogy is the fallout of that and the heroes rising up to free the galaxy from Palpatine. And now we've gotten so many stories to flesh that out, like Clone Wars and Rebels and Andor and Rogue One, to show how much was sacrificed along the way. Andor and Rogue One really make the destruction of the Death Star in Episode 4 a really emotional moment, since we know what was sacrificed on the road there, and how that paved the way for Luke to become a Jedi and save Vader and kill the Emperor and free the galaxy. But I guess none of that really meant much, because Palps was always going to come back and have a granddaughter and a fleet of supersized Death Star-powered Star Destroyers. Like, it's fanfic garbage. As is the movie's obsession with making up Force powers every 5 minutes. Like, Empire introducing levitation for the Force is fine, because nothing in the OG said they couldn't do that. And then, Jedi making up Force lightning also felt fine. Little Force powers getting introduced every now and again is fine, but now Rey and Kylo can just transfer objects through the Force Zoom calls they have, and Force heal wounds, and just stuff that feels pulled out of the writer's ass. Which further contributes to the problem of the whole movie feeling like scenes desperately stuck together to make a coherent plot worthy of a 2-hour runtime. It all culminates in the final battle, where I guess horses are in Star Wars now, and we get this lame-ass scene where the galaxy shows up to back the Resistance. It's meant to be a play on the ending of Last Jedi, where the galaxy loses all hope and doesn't back the Resistance on Crate, but this scene feels like it's trying to be the Portal scene from Avengers Endgame, but lacks all the impact. It's not characters we saw grow and die come back at the last second to save the day. It's just a bunch of ships piloted by people we've never seen and never will, in the midst of a space battle that makes no sense, attached to a plot and conflict you care nothing for. It's fucking awful. Palpatine dies again, Ben Solo dies redeemed, Rey decides to continue the Skywalker name, and then the movie ends. Like, holy crap, this movie stinks. And that's only scratching the surface. Like I said, this movie's been analyzed to death, but I used the Darth Vader video as a way to talk about the prequels, so I wanted to use a Rise of Skywalker video to talk about the sequels. On the whole, I really don't think Disney Star Wars has been that bad. Like, I feel as though they've put out more things I was entertained by than not. And then most of it that I don't care about, I'll just not watch. Like, I stopped watching The Acolyte after 15 minutes because I was like, wait a minute, I don't care about this, and then went on with my day. However, for me, The Rise of Skywalker was a unique low point. A friend of mine once said that he'd like to believe that all compelling art has a reason to exist, and I agree. And that's why I think Rise of Skywalker is the worst Star Wars movie by a country mile. Because the movie adds nothing to the mythos. If anything, it takes away. The movie has nothing to say. Some think The Last Jedi was worse. I could perhaps see why, but I never could. Because The Last Jedi is a movie with direction and intent behind its story. There's a reason why it's the most widely discussed Disney Star Wars thing. Because it's one of the few that had something it wanted to say. Even something like The Force Awakens has production value and characters I really appreciate. But then, The Rise of Skywalker is just depressingly void of anything. It offers nothing new, says nothing in a desperate attempt to avoid backlash, and people hated it anyway because it was bad and offered nothing beyond product to consume. I don't like the story and acting and dialogue of Attack of the Clones, but it had a story. It had purpose behind its characters and plot. and is a landmark moment in the history of digital filmmaking and blockbusters. This movie, by comparison, has absolutely none of that. It's a waste of time and energy, and that vibe carried the movie throughout its press cycle and to this day. So while I don't think the Disney era of Star Wars has been that diabolical, gotta say, next time I decide to binge anything Star Wars related, I'm gonna be leaving this one at the door.